There is a wedding in a small village in Galilee, and they have run out of wine. This doesn't sound like the beginning of anything important. It sounds like a catering problem, a social embarrassment, the kind of thing that gets forgotten by the following week. But it isn't forgotten. It is written down, preserved across 2,000 years. And if you read it carefully, really carefully, you'll notice that the man who solves the problem doesn't announce himself. He doesn't stand up and declare who he is. He just acts, quietly, almost reluctantly, and in that single act, something shifts in the universe that will never shift back. This is the story of every miracle Jesus ever performed, not just the famous ones, not just the ones you learned in Sunday school. All of them, the ones that get headlines, and the ones that get skipped, the ones that make you weep, and the ones that should terrify you. Taken together, they tell a story that no single miracle can tell on its own. And before this video ends, I'm going to show you one miracle that almost every Bible teacher skips, one that Jesus performed in the final hours before his arrest. It might be the most important thing he ever did, and almost nobody talks about it. But first, Cana, and a wedding, and 6 stone jars. The village of Cana sits in the hills of Lower Galilee, a few miles north of Nazareth. It's a small place, unremarkable. The kind of town where everybody knows everybody, which means everybody knows when something goes wrong, and something has gone very wrong. In first-century Jewish culture, a wedding wasn't a single evening, it was a week-long celebration. The whole village came. The host family was responsible for feeding and supplying everyone who attended. Running out of wine wasn't just embarrassing, it was a social catastrophe. In some cases, it could result in legal action from the bride's family. It was the kind of failure that followed a family for a generation. Mary, the mother of Jesus, knows this. And she knows something else, something she has carried quietly for 30 years, since an angel appeared to her in a room in Nazareth and told her things that made no sense until they did. She finds her son. She says, simply, "They have no wine." What happens next is one of the most misread exchanges in all of Scripture. Jesus responds, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." That word woman sounds cold to modern ears, but in the Greek it is ginai, a term of deep respect. He is not dismissing her. He is telling her something about timing, about a plan already in motion, about an hour he has been moving towards since before the foundation of the world, and yet he acts. He tells the servants to fill 6 stone jars with water. Each jar holds 20 to 30 gallons. That's up to 180 gallons of water. The servants fill them to the brim. Jesus tells them to draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. The master of the feast tastes it, stops, turns to the bridegroom with genuine confusion. "Everyone serves the good wine first," he says, "and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." He has no idea what just happened. The servants know. Mary knows. And the disciples John records this see it and believe. John doesn't call this miracle a miracle. He calls it a semeion, a sign. In Greek, semeion means more than a wonder or a supernatural act. It means a signpost, something pointing beyond itself to something greater. The miracle at Cana isn't just about wine. It is a signpost. And if you know where to look, you can read what it says. Here's what most people miss. The 6 stone jars weren't decorative. They were ceremonial, used for Jewish purification rites. The water inside them was set apart for ritual washing. Jesus doesn't create wine from nothing. He transforms what was already there, water held in vessels meant for religious ritual, into something that makes the whole celebration come alive. He takes the old and makes it new. He takes what was set aside for religion and turns it into something meant for joy. John places this miracle first for a reason. It is not the most dramatic miracle Jesus performs, but it is the one that sets the template for everything that follows. After Cana, Jesus moves. He is rarely still. The Gospels track him across Galilee, through Judea, into the regions beyond the Jordan, healing, teaching, moving through crowds the way a fire moves through dry grass. And the crowds find him everywhere. Word spreads the way word only spreads, in places where nothing ever happens, and then suddenly everything does. People carry sick relatives on mats. Mothers bring feverish children. Old men who haven't walked in years are hauled through crowds by sons who refused to give up. One of the first accounts after Cana is almost easy to miss. Simon Peter's mother-in-law, lying in bed with a fever in Capernaum. Jesus enters the house. He takes her hand. He lifts her up. The fever leaves. And immediately, the text says, immediately she begins to serve them. No fanfare, no announcement, no crowd watching. Just a hand, a word, and a woman back on her feet. Luke, the physician, records this detail in his gospel with the careful eye of someone who knows what fever does to a body. He uses the Greek medical term for the fever, breaking the same language a doctor would use. And he notes that Jesus rebuked the fever. The same word used when Jesus rebukes a storm. The same word used when he confronts a demon. He speaks to fever the way you speak to something that has no right to be there. This is the second pattern emerging. Not just transformation, but authority. Jesus doesn't pray for healing and hope. He commands it. There is no hesitation in the Gospels when Jesus heals. No moment of uncertainty. When he speaks, the body obeys. And then come the crowd. Mark records it this way. That evening at sundown, they brought to him all who were sick or oppressed by evil spirits, and the whole city was gathered together at the door. The whole city. You have to stop and picture that. Every person who is suffering, every family with a member they've given up hope for, packed into the streets outside a house in Capernaum as the sun goes down, and Jesus heals them, one by one, not all at once, one by one. The Greek word used for his power in these healing moments is dunamis. You know this word. It is the root of the English word dynamite. But in Greek it means something more contained than an explosion. It means latent force power held in reserve, released with precision. The power that holds a star in orbit and keeps a sparrow from falling. Released in Capernaum through the hands of a man who woke up early the next morning to pray alone in a desolate place. Before this video continues, I want you to think about someone in your own life, someone you've carried to a figurative door, someone you've brought before God in prayer again and again, until the prayers started to feel like habit instead of hope. Because this video isn't just a history of miracles, it's an account of the kind of God who meets people at their most desperate. Every name in the Gospels was a real person who had run out of options. Every miracle happened at the end of someone's rope. And then there is the catch of fish. Simon Peter is washing his nets on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. He has fished all night. He has caught nothing. He is tired in the specific way that only failure after hard work can make you tired, not just physically exhausted, but hollowed out. Jesus climbs into his boat and asks him to push out a little from shore. He uses the boat as a teaching platform, speaking to the crowds on the bank, and when he finishes, he turns to Simon and says something that must have sounded almost insulting to a professional fisherman. Put out into the deep and let down your nets for a catch. Simon has done this all night. He knows these waters. He knows the fish aren't there, and yet something makes him answer the way he does. Master, we toiled all night and took nothing, but at your word I will let down the nets. At your word. That is the hinge of every miracle in the Gospels. Not technique, not formula, not the right prayer said in the right order. At your word. The willingness to do the unreasonable thing because the one asking has authority over the outcome. The nets fill so fast they begin to tear. Peter signals to James and John in the other boat. They come. Both boats fill with fish until they begin to sink. And here is the moment that stops you cold. Peter doesn't say thank you. He doesn't ask for more. He falls to his knees in the boat surrounded by more fish than he has ever caught in his life, and he says, "Depart from me, for I am a sinful man, O Lord." Something in the miracle reveals not just the power of Jesus, but the nature of Peter. When you stand in the presence of genuine holiness, your first instinct is not gratitude. It is exposure. You feel all at once exactly who you are. Jesus answers with the line that will define the rest of Peter's life. Do not be afraid. From now on you will be catching men. They leave the boats, they leave the fish, they leave everything, and they follow him. There is a man lying on a mat by a pool in Jerusalem, and he has been lying there for 38 years. The pool is called Bethesda. In Hebrew, the name means house of mercy. The porticos around the pool are filled with people, the blind, the lame, the paralyzed, all waiting for a moment described in the text as the stirring of the water, when the first person to step in would be healed. It is a place of desperate hope, a place where people come when they have nowhere else to go. Jesus walks through this place. He sees the man, and he asks him a question that sounds almost cruel when you first hear it. Do you want to be healed? You want to answer for the man. Of course he wants to be healed. He has been here for 38 years. But Jesus isn't asking a cruel question. He is asking the most important question. Because 38 years is long enough to build an identity around your suffering. Long enough to stop imagining life any other way. Long enough to make the answer to "do you want to be healed" more complicated than it first appears. The man doesn't say yes. He explains why it hasn't happened yet. "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up, and while I am going, another steps down before me." He gives Jesus a logistical problem. Jesus gives him a command. Get up, take up your bed, and walk. And he does. No gradual healing, no physical therapy, no easing into it. The man picks up the mat he has laid on for 38 years and he walks. John records this as the third sign, and like every sign before it, it points beyond itself. Jesus heals this man on the Sabbath deliberately, publicly, and when the religious leaders confront him, Jesus says something that should have ended the conversation but instead deepens the mystery. My Father is working until now, and I am working. He is not just a healer. He is doing what the Father does. The miracle is a window into something far larger than one man's legs. Here's what most people miss about the miracles of Jesus. He never heals the same way twice. Think about that. He heals one blind man by making mud from dirt and saliva and putting it on his eyes. He heals another blind man simply by touching his eyes. He heals another Bartimaeus with nothing but a spoken word from a distance. He heals a paralytic by forgiving his sins first, and then telling him to walk. He heals 10 lepers by sending them to show themselves to the priest, and the healing happens on the way, while they are still moving in obedience. He never uses a formula. He never develops a method. Every miracle is custom-made for the person in front of him, as if he has known them since before they were born, as if he has been waiting specifically for this exact moment with this exact person. The Greek word John uses for how Jesus sees people is not the ordinary word for looking. It is emblepo, a deep, penetrating gaze. To look into, to see through the surface of a person down to the thing underneath that needs tending. Every person Jesus heals, he first truly sees. And in a world where the sick and the broken were routinely made invisible, pushed to the margins, labeled unclean, kept behind walls and outside city gates, being truly seen by Jesus is already in itself a kind of miracle. There is a woman in the crowd who has been bleeding for 12 years. 12 years. Luke the physician notes this with clinical precision. She has spent everything she had on doctors. She has grown worse, not better. Under Jewish law, her condition makes her ceremonially unclean, which means that everything she touches becomes unclean, which means she cannot go to the temple, cannot participate in community worship, cannot be embraced by family without making them unclean. For 12 years, she has been untouchable. She has heard about Jesus. She pushes through the crowd, which is itself an act of extraordinary courage, because touching people in her condition is forbidden, and she reaches out and touches the hem of his garment, and immediately the bleeding stops. But here is what happens next that most people gloss over. Jesus stops walking. In the middle of a crowd pressing in from every side, he says, "Who touched me?" The disciples think this is a strange question. Peter says, essentially, "Everyone is touching you. What do you mean, who touched you?" But Jesus says, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." He felt it, the dunamis, the power leaving him, not because he was depleted, but because he was aware. He is always aware. Every act of healing is not an automatic mechanical process. It is personal, intentional. He knows. The woman comes forward. She is trembling. She falls at his feet and tells him everything, the whole 12-year story, in front of the crowd, and he says to her the words that every person who has ever suffered alone in secret needs to hear. "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." Daughter, not woman, not you. Daughter. A word of belonging. A word that says you are not unclean. You are not invisible. You are not defined by what your body has done to you for 12 years. You are mine. And she is healed not just in her body. She is restored to community, restored to worship, restored to the embrace of every person she hasn't been able to touch for a decade. The miracle is bigger than the bleeding. It always is. Now stay with me, because this changes everything. If you step back and look at the miracles of Jesus across all 4 Gospels, a pattern emerges that is almost mathematical in its precision. Scholars have counted and categorized. The numbers vary slightly depending on how you define a distinct miracle, but most careful readings identify 37 specific miracles recorded in the Gospels, 37 signposts, and they escalate, not randomly, deliberately, in a rising arc that builds toward a single staggering conclusion. The first category, miracles over nature, water to wine, the calming of the storm, walking on water, the feeding of 5,000, and then separately, the feeding of 4,000, which most people forget is a second distinct miracle. Multiplied fish, a coin found in the mouth of a fish to pay the temple tax. These miracles establish a simple, earth-shaking fact. The natural world obeys him. The wind and the waves don't just calm when he speaks. Mark records that the word Jesus uses to rebuke the storm is the same word used to rebuke a demon. He speaks to the storm the way you speak to something with a will, and it listens. The second category, miracles over sickness and physical brokenness. These are the most numerous. The paralyzed walk, the blind see, the deaf hear, the mute speak, the lepers are cleansed. The woman bent double for 18 years. Luke records her story, straightens up for the first time in nearly 2 decades and glorifies God. 10 lepers are healed, and only 1 comes back to say thank you. 1. And Jesus asks quietly where the other 9 are, not in anger, in something that sounds honestly more like grief. But in this second category, something shifts. The miracles begin to involve people who were, by the standards of their time, the least important people in the room. A Samaritan leper, a double outcast, despised both for his disease and his ethnicity. The one who comes back. The centurion's servant, a Gentile's household, not even a Jew. The Syrophoenician woman's daughter, a Gentile. A woman, a child. 3 strikes in the social hierarchy of the ancient world. Jesus heals all of them. He goes out of his way to heal some of them. And each healing is a quiet announcement that the kingdom he is building has no waiting room, no exclusion list, no one who is too far outside the acceptable circle. Here's the part nobody talks about. The religious leaders of Jesus' time believed that sickness was, in many cases, a sign of God's judgment. If you were blind from birth, someone had sinned you or your parents. If you were poor and sick, you were being punished. The theology of suffering in first-century Judaism had, in some quarters, hardened into a system that blamed the victim and kept the broken in their place. The disciples asked Jesus directly about the man born blind. "Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind?" They are not being cruel. They are being theological. They are asking the question their tradition trained them to ask. Jesus' answer dismantles the entire framework. It was not that this man sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. He refuses the premise. He rejects the theology. And then he heals the man because that is what the works of God look like, displayed in flesh. Josephus, the first-century Jewish historian writing for a Roman audience, refers to Jesus in the Antiquities of the Jews as a doer of wonderful works. He is not a believer. He is a careful historian documenting what the historical record shows. And even from outside the faith, the miracles are undeniable enough to be recorded. But there is a third category, and this is where the miracles stop being remarkable and start being something else entirely. Jesus raises the dead, not metaphorically, not symbolically. Actually, physically, biologically raises people from the dead. The first is the daughter of Jairus, a synagogue ruler, a man of religious standing and community respect, who falls at Jesus' feet in the middle of a crowd and begs him to come to his house because his daughter is dying. Jesus starts toward the house. The woman with the issue of blood interrupts. And while that detour is happening, word comes from Jairus' house. Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. Stop and feel that sentence. Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore. The people who send this message believe there is a category of situation that is beyond Jesus. Death is the border they think he cannot cross. Jesus hears it. He turns to Jairus and says 5 words that have been spoken into the darkest moments of human history ever since. Do not fear, only believe. He enters the house. The mourners are already there, wailing, weeping, filling the rooms with grief. Jesus says, the child is not dead but sleeping, and they laugh at him. That detail is important. These are people familiar with death. They know what they saw. They are not laughing because they don't understand the situation. They are laughing because they understand it completely. And what Jesus is suggesting seems absurd. He puts them all outside. He takes the girl's father, her mother, and 3 disciples, Peter, James, and John. He goes to the child. He takes her hand. And he speaks 2 words in Aramaic, the language she grew up hearing at the dinner table, the language of her mother's lullabies. Talitha kumi. Little girl, arise, and she gets up immediately. And Jesus tells them with what reads almost like gentleness to give her something to eat. He raises the dead, and his first concern is that she has something to eat. If you have ever stood at the graveside of someone you loved and felt the specific wordless agony of a door slamming shut, this next story is for you. The town is called Nain. Jesus is traveling with his disciples and a large crowd when he approaches the gate of the city. Coming out of the gate is a funeral procession. A young man, the only son of a widowed mother, is being carried out for burial. Luke records this scene with the kind of precision that only someone who was moved by it could manage. He tells us the son was the widow's only son. He tells us a large crowd from the town was with her. He is painting a picture of total loss, a woman whose husband is gone, whose only son is now gone, surrounded by mourners who can offer nothing but presence in the face of irreversible catastrophe. Jesus sees her, and the text says something that Luke seems to have chosen very carefully. When the Lord saw her, he had compassion on her. The Greek word translated compassion here is splagchnizomai. It refers, in the ancient world, to the visceral physical sensation of being moved literally, to feel it in your gut. This is not polite sympathy. This is the kind of grief that grips you somewhere beneath your ribs when you see something you cannot bear to leave as it is. Jesus doesn't wait for her to ask. He doesn't require faith. He doesn't ask any question. He walks to the funeral bier and touches it, making himself ceremonially unclean in the act, and says, "Young man, I say to you, arise." And the man sits up and begins to speak. Luke records the crowd's response with one of the most understated lines in the New Testament. Fear seized them all, and they glorified God. This is the second time someone is raised from the dead in the Gospels. But notice what is different, Jairus asked. He begged. He fell at Jesus' feet. This widow said nothing. She didn't even know Jesus was there. He raised her son because he saw her, because he had compassion, because he could not walk past that kind of grief and do nothing. And then at roughly the 80% mark of everything Jesus does publicly before the cross comes the miracle that changes everything, the one that forces the hand of the religious leaders, the one that begins the chain of events leading directly to the crucifixion. Lazarus. Jesus receives word that his friend Lazarus is sick. Lazarus and his sisters Mary and Martha live in Bethany, just outside Jerusalem, and they are among the people Jesus loves most in the world. John says it plainly. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, and Jesus waits 2 days before leaving. This is one of the most disturbing moments in the Gospels if you're paying attention. He loves them. He knows Lazarus is sick. He has the power to heal at a word. He has already demonstrated this, and he waits. On purpose, he says to his disciples, "Lazarus has died, and for your sake I am glad that I was not there, so that you may believe." Glad. That word will sit uncomfortably in your chest if you let it. Because what Jesus is saying is that what is about to happen is bigger than a healing. A healing would have been enough. A healing would have been wonderful. But what is about to happen requires death. It requires the full weight of grief, loss, and finality so that what comes next has its full meaning. By the time Jesus arrives, Lazarus has been in the tomb 4 days. Martha meets him on the road. "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." There is no accusation in it, exactly, but there is something of grief that asks quietly why he waited. Jesus says, "Your brother will rise again." Martha says, "I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day." She believes in the future resurrection. She has the theology right. But Jesus says something that reorders the entire framework. "I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me, though he die, yet shall he live." I am, the divine name. The name God spoke to Moses from a burning bush. Jesus is not pointing Martha to a future event. He is pointing her to a present person. Then Mary comes. She falls at his feet. She says the same words Martha said, "Lord, if you had been here." And around her are the mourners, weeping. And John records 3 words that have stopped readers cold for 2,000 years. Jesus wept. The shortest verse in the Bible. And perhaps the most important, because he already knows what he is about to do. He knows Lazarus is coming out of that tomb. He knows, and he weeps anyway, because the grief of the people he loves is not a problem to be solved before comfort can be given. It is something he enters. He weeps with Mary before he raises Lazarus. He sits in the grief before he ends it. They take him to the tomb, a cave with a stone rolled against it. Jesus says, "Take away the stone." Martha protests, "Lord, by this time there will be an odor, for he has been dead 4 days. 4 days. In the theology of the time, the soul was believed to linger near the body for 3 days. 4 days was unambiguous. This was not a coma. This was not a near-death experience. This was death in its most settled, irreversible form. Jesus prays audibly, for the sake of the crowd, and then calls into the darkness of the tomb, "Lazarus, come out." And he does, still wrapped in burial cloths, his face still covered, shuffling out of the darkness into the light. And Jesus says, with the quiet authority of someone who has just done exactly what he said he would do, "Unbind him and let him go." John records that many who saw it believed. He also records that some of them went directly to the Pharisees to report what had happened. And from that moment, the council begins to plan in earnest how to put Jesus to death. The miracle that displayed his greatest power is the same miracle that signed his death warrant. There is one more miracle, and almost no one talks about, not because it is hard to find. It is right there in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 22. It happens in a garden called Gethsemane in the hours before dawn, on the night Jesus is arrested. And it is, in many ways, the most astonishing thing he ever does, not because of its scale, not because of its spectacle, but because of who he does it for. But we are not there yet. Before Gethsemane, there is one more thing you need to understand about the pattern. If you have watched carefully across everything this video has covered, you have seen the arc: miracles over nature, miracles over sickness, miracles over death, each category deeper than the last, each one pressing harder against the boundaries of what is possible. And in every single miracle, without exception, there is a moment of encounter, a moment where Jesus and one specific person are, in some essential way, alone together, even in a crowd of thousands, even at a public pool surrounded by the sick, even at the graveside of a man 4 days dead. He never heals a category, he heals a person. The Greek word for the crowds that follow Jesus is aklos, a mass of people, a throng. But the word he uses when he addresses the people he heals is almost always singular. He doesn't say, "Be healed, all of you." He says, "Your faith has made you well." You're singular, as if the 5,000 people pressing in from every side had disappeared for a moment, and there was only the one person who needed him most. And this is where the pattern becomes something more than impressive. It becomes personal. It becomes the kind of thing that reaches through 2,000 years of history and puts a hand on your shoulder. Because if he did it this way, then deliberately, specifically, one person at a time, in the middle of crowds, in the middle of chaos, with a name and a word and a touch custom designed for the exact wound you are carrying, then the question the Gospels force you to ask is not, did these miracles happen? The question is, what does it mean that he still sees you the way he saw the woman with 12 years of bleeding? What does it mean that he weeps with you before he acts, the way he wept with Mary before he called Lazarus out of the tomb? What does it mean that he can speak to the storm inside your life the same way he spoke to the storm on the Sea of Galilee? And this is where it gets remarkable, because the miracles of Jesus are not just a record of things he did, they are a record of who he is. And who he is does not change. The writer of Hebrews puts it in one of the most quietly staggering lines in all of Scripture. Jesus Christ is the same yesterday and today and forever. The hands that made mud for a blind man's eyes. The voice that called Lazarus out of the dark. The compassion that stopped a funeral procession in Nain because he could not walk past a grieving mother and do nothing. That is not a historical figure. That is a living person. And he has not become less capable or less attentive or less moved by what moves you since the last page of the Gospel of John was written. Now, the garden. It is late, or early, the kind of hour that belongs to neither night nor day. Jesus has finished the Last Supper. He has washed the disciples' feet. He has prayed the most intimate prayer recorded in the Gospels, 17 verses in John chapter 17, a prayer that includes you specifically when he says, "I do not ask for these only, but also for those who will believe in me through their word." He prayed for you before you were born, in a garden outside Jerusalem on the night he was arrested. And then the soldiers come. Judas leads them, a cohort of Roman soldiers, temple guards, chief priests, Pharisees carrying torches and weapons into the garden. Jesus steps forward and asks who they are looking for. "Jesus of Nazareth," they say, and he says, "I am he." And John records something that every reader of this passage tends to rush past. They drew back and fell to the ground. The "I am" the divine name, spoken in a garden in the dark, and armed soldiers fall backward to the ground. He lets them recover. He lets them take him. But in the moment of his arrest, one of the disciples, John doesn't name him, but Luke and the other accounts make clear it is Peter, draws a sword. And in the chaos and the darkness and the fear, Peter swings. And he cuts off the ear of a man named Malchus, the servant of the high priest. And here is the miracle nobody talks about. Jesus, in the moment of his own arrest, surrounded by soldiers, in the hour he has been dreading so deeply that he sweat drops of blood in prayer just moments before, reaches out and heals the ear of the man who came to take him away. He heals his enemy, not a follower, not a seeker, not a desperate mother or a grateful leper, the servant of the man orchestrating his death. Jesus picks up what Peter's panic destroyed and he makes it whole. Luke, the physician, uses the Greek word eomai to heal completely, to restore to full function. Not a bandage, not a patch, a complete restoration. This is the last miracle Jesus performs before the cross. And it tells you everything. It tells you that the power was never not there. Right up until the moment of his arrest, until the moment the nails went in, he could have stopped it. He could have called 12 legions of angels, he says so himself. He could have walked away from every bit of what was coming. He had healed 37 people across 3 years of public ministry. He could have healed himself. He didn't. He healed Malchus instead. He healed the enemy. He demonstrated, in the last free act of his earthly ministry, that his power and his love had no boundary, not even the boundary of whether you deserved it, not even the boundary of whether you came to arrest him. And then he let them take him. He walked willingly into the worst thing that has ever happened in human history, so that something else, something on the other side of that worst thing, could become possible for every person who has ever needed a miracle they couldn't manufacture for themselves. The pattern held all the way to the end. So here is what the miracles of Jesus add up to, taken together in order. The first thing, every miracle was addressed to a specific person. Jesus never healed a crowd. He healed individuals within crowds. 37 miracles, 37 people with names and histories, and specific wounds that no one else could see quite the way he could. The feeding of the 5,000 fed thousands of bodies, yes. But the miracle was performed for the disciples to show them something they could not yet believe about who was standing in front of them. Every miracle at its core was personal, which means that if you have ever felt too small or too ordinary or too far outside the acceptable circle to be noticed, the Gospels say otherwise. He noticed the woman who touched the hem of his garment in a crowd pressing in from every side. He noticed the one leper who came back. He notices you. The second thing, the pattern always required something from the person receiving it. Get up and walk. Let down your nets. Go show yourself to the priest. Stretch out your hand. Roll away the stone. The miracle always met human action somewhere along the way, not because Jesus needed the cooperation, clearly. He didn't. But because the miracle was never just about the physical outcome. It was about what happened in the person on the way to the outcome. The 10 lepers were healed while they were going, while they were still moving in obedience, before they had seen any evidence that anything was changing. Faith in the Gospels is almost never passive. It is the willingness to do the unreasonable thing because the one asking has authority over the outcome. The third thing, and this is the one I want you to carry out of this video. The last miracle Jesus performed before the cross was not for a follower. It was not for someone who believed in him. It was for the servant of the man who was having him killed. Jesus healed his enemy. He picked up what hatred and fear and panic had torn apart, and he made it whole. And then he let them lead him away. If you have ever wondered whether the grace of God has a limit, whether there is a version of yourself that has gone too far, waited too long, made too many wrong choices to be on the receiving end of something that looks like a miracle, the answer is in a garden in Jerusalem on a dark Thursday night. The answer is a man named Malchus, whose ear was restored by the same hands that were about to be nailed to a cross. There is no one he will not reach for. There is no moment too far gone. There is no door he cannot open from the other side. The miracles didn't stop in the first century. They changed form. They move now through ordinary people in ordinary moments, through an unexpected word spoken at exactly the right time, through a door that opens when every other door was closed, through the strange and stubborn persistence of hope in people who have every reason not to hope. The same dunamis, the same Simeon, The same Jesus who stood at a wedding in Cana and quietly, without announcement, made something better than what was there before. If you've been waiting at a pool called Bethesda, waiting for someone to put you in the water, waiting for your turn, waiting until you had enough faith or enough goodness or enough of whatever you think you're lacking, hear this. He is already walking towards you. He already sees you, and he is already asking the question that matters most. Do you want to be healed? Now, if this video opened something in you, if it brought a name to mind or a weight you've been carrying that you haven't been able to name, I want you to do one thing before you close this tab. Scroll down and leave a comment with just one word. The word that describes what you need Jesus to walk into right now. You don't have to explain it. One word is enough. He knows the rest. And if you want to go deeper, the next video covers every time Jesus stopped a funeral. There were 3, and each one tells a different story about the same God who refuses to let death have the final word. It's linked right here. I'll see you there.